This is Connections. From class to career, join us as we explore the interconnection between life, learning, and work. We are your hosts, Mark Andrade and Michael Spencer, recording from Humber Polytechnic.
We're recording from the Carol Reed Resource Center at Humber's North Campus. This lab helps early childhood educators develop the hands-on skills they need to be successful educators for our future generations. We're here today because our guest is a registered early childhood educator.
Today we talk with Nicole Cummings-Morgan, who is the founder and executive director of W1derus Educational Workshops, where she draws on over 20 years of experience to lead transformative sessions on topics of anti-Black racism, communication, and community building. She's also a children's book author, lifelong advocate, and a professor at Humber, dedicated to helping others see differences as strengths. Let's have a listen.
One of the things that kind of came up in that bio, Nicole, is that you founded and run an educational organization called W1derus, and you've worked as an ECE for over 20 years, and also wrote a children's book called I Find It Hard to Learn. And I think a common theme in some of this work is helping people navigate their professional and personal journey, something that we're kind of talking a lot about in this podcast, to discover their true gifts, talents, and skills. I'm wondering if you could describe your own journey and how you came to discover your own gifts, talents, and skills, because I think it's something that we spend a lot of time talking to students about and trying to help them to discover those things. I'm wondering how you did that yourself.
Yeah, for me, I think it just came as a happenstance, that sort of thing where life puts you in a situation and you have to do what you had to do. I started off, I was a teen mom, my son, I had him at 17. And, after having him, I had to figure out certain things. I knew I wanted to work with children, just didn't know how. And so I started to do small things like volunteering and working in church. And then I kind of thought, okay, well, you know what? I should make this legit. Let me go to school. So I went to school. Things didn't work out. I kind of thought, okay, you know what? Forget school. Let me go into jobs. The running joke in my family is that I've had 30 jobs by the time I was 30. And that was just because I was that type of person that I walked in, you didn't look at me right, I'm out. You didn't say what I wanted to hear, I'm out. Obviously, fast forward 25 years later, I found out that I had ADHD. So that kind of helped me with connecting some of the dots in terms of me finding out my talents, abilities, gifts, and skills, because I realized that, so it wasn't just me being, bored with everything and annoyed with everyone. It was actually, a neurodiverse, thing. Something was happening within my brain. So for me, that part happened with me going through my jobs and then finally getting to a point where I was like, you know what, I can't keep doing this job thing. I had my kids. I had ended up having 2 more at that point. So by the time I was 28, I was like, okay, Nicole, shut it down, figure something out. Okay. So went back, finished my ECE, opened up home childcare, did that for a bit. Again, wasn't happy, ready to move on. Finished my diploma. After I finished there, I was working at YMCA. Again, time to move on. So I realized that there was this commonality in my life that I wouldn't last more than a year or 2 in a job. And that was just because when I saw things that needed to be done, it was time for me to move. And one of the things that I realized is, okay, well, if this is happening to me, it has to be happening to others. And what's happening to others, unfortunately, isn't as fortunate as because I was able to actually do it in a positive way. So, I was able to go to school, I created business from it, I met people, I networked, I advocated. But unfortunately, for people that aren't unable to find their talents, abilities, gifts, and skills, and that's just so you know, I actually created a little acronym for it now for my business. It's called TAGS. So it's W1derus Educational Workshops, helping you to find your tags So that way you could be well. Okay. So yeah. So for
Sorry,
me,
say that again. Tags is talents.
talents, abilities, gifts, and skills.
Right. That's
Yeah.
great.
So
Love it. Love it.
yeah, right. And then so anyway, so I figured, how can we help our young people who unfortunately don't know what they want to do, right? Because at least for me, despite the fact that I kept going into these different jobs, it always got back to children, families, community. So I knew that I had to be in that mix somewhere, somehow. But for me, I thought, what happens for the young people who don't have a clue? They don't know what they want to do.
Yeah.
So I thought, you know what? I am going to start an organization called W1derus Educational Workshops. And the goal of it was to provide young people with opportunities to be exposed to things that they're not being exposed to at school. So when I started talking to more parents, I started talking to educators, started talking to students, everyone was like, yeah, it's true. Like when you think about it, I'm sure if I were to ask you both, you know, when you're thinking about going to school, was school really where you found what you love to do? Was school really where you found your purpose? Not many people can say yes, right?
Yeah.
So I thought I want to create a space where we can offer families and young people an opportunity to be able to see what else is out there.
The second question I'm interested in is, that you're wearing a lot of hats. And I think a lot of research, as you mentioned, would say that students now, it's not like our parents where you were an accountant and you were an accountant, you were born an accountant and you died an accountant, you know? Is there a common denominator or mindset that kind of connects these identities? You know, we're kind of curious to know, for you at least, what's at the center of them all?
Family and community. You know, I recognized that growing up, I was blessed. Like I had a great family, still have a great family. But then, you know, as you get older, things started to happen where you started to see people differently, right? And then things would happen, like conflict would happen within family. And I kept thinking, well, what is going on? Like, what's wrong? In all of our learning, we don't learn how to be good people. Like we don't really, nobody really thinks about the idea that, you know, being a leader, being professional, like all of the learning outcomes that you all, you know, had introduced me to with Humber's, their program. I was like, yeah, I agree. This is what I've been trying to say, is that if we don't teach our young people from as early as 3, 4, and 5, the importance of professionalism, problem solving, how to speak to people in a kind way, leadership skills, how to use those leadership skills in a positive way. All we're doing is continuing a cycle of intergenerational trauma. We're just creating people that are just taking on other people's types of behaviors. And unfortunately, they're not being, you know, distributed in a positive way. So I thought to myself, you know what? We have to change. The mindset I took on is what would happen if everyone were happy? I know it sounds so like minuscule, like you're thinking, well, what? Is that even possible? Like who would even want to be happy all the time? But I thought to myself, well, if everyone were more happy, then people that are happy tend to do better things. Like they're more giving, they volunteer their time, they're, you know, in communities, they're not doing anything negative. So how can we just create this, you know, utopia of Nicole's world everywhere? And then that's when, I just kind of thought about the idea of, you know, equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, that being a part, again, of starting early, right? And then the mindset of just because we grew up a certain way, it doesn't mean that we have to continue to be that way, right? So just because you grew up and you saw people being angry or critical, you don't have to be that way. There's ways for us to reprogram ourselves. And that's when I started looking into Dr. Joe Dispenza. He talks a lot about that, how, you know, if we were to start changing our mindsets in terms of reprogramming ourselves, we could then change our personalities. Once we change our personalities, we change our future. Once we change our future into happiness, we're just a better
Right.
bunch of people. You know how we talked about this idea of being interconnected? And
Yes.
I love that idea, because one of my workshops is actually called All Things Connect, because while many people will think of me as just an early childhood educator, I say to them, no, it connects with everything.
Right.
So if you're working at Walmart, think about it. If you're a better person, how much better you can be for the people that you're working with, customers. Think about those people that you meet for
Yeah.
a minute. You know, those small conversations. You're walking on the street and somebody says something to you. Imagine how uplifting and affirming those moments are. So imagine if we had more people doing that to all of the children or the youth that were just in our community. How much more, how much better we would all be.
Education system and kind of society is so good at kind of like replicating experiences, right? And it's so important to kind of break those cycles or break those patterns. But how do you do that when the kind of people who are put into positions of power within those systems have little interest in doing that, or haven't had those experiences, so can't even see the problem to begin with, right? And I think you brought this up. I was reading an interview with you from the College of Early Childhood Educators from 2020. And in it, you say you felt guilty, that was the word, the quote I took out of it, for being a Black educator who's unfamiliar with researchers who looked like me or had experiences like mine. And kind of connected to that idea of breaking that cycle kind of within the education system, but also just, I guess, in generally. I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how that lack of representation affected your personal and professional development.
For sure. For personally, I felt like there weren't a lot of people doing community work, right? There weren't a lot of, and it's not that we didn't want to. I just felt like there were so many things happening within our Black community that we didn't have time. Right. I remember going to, in my church, we do a lot of, they have a lot of charities and they do their ministry their missions work. And when I looked at all the missionaries that were coming in, they were not of my color. They were not Black. They were Black. And I kept feeling like, well, what's going on? And then when I spoke to a few of my fellow educators and I said, well, what's going on with us? Like, what's going on? And many of us kind of thought, well, you know what? We have so much going on within our families to deal with that it's hard for us to get out and say that we're going to give to our community, right? Thankfully, now we're starting to see a big shift, right? Where many of us are recognizing that we need to get out and do more. So that's awesome and amazing. I'm grateful for that. So that was one piece. Was personally, I wasn't seeing a lot of people doing work within the community. And then professionally, to realize that, when I'm looking at, I went to OISE, I went to U of T, no Black professors. I did Guelph Humber, I did my degree at Guelph Humber, no Black professors. I went to Seneca to do my diploma, no Black professors, right? And I'm thinking, what's going on? So now it's like 2024. And when I have students coming to me and saying, I'm so glad that you're my professor because you're the only one I've seen, or you're one of the three, or the one of the two, right? And I'm thinking, are we still here? Like, is this really still happening?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? So, I think not seeing it is what gave me the inspiration to become what I am. Even before becoming a professor, I just wanted to be someone that young Black children, Black youth could look up to, and really want to do better, right? Because that's all I want. I want all of us to do better, regardless of where you're from at this point. I just want us all to be connected. Like, all things connect. It's really not a joke. Like, it's serious. Like, I feel like people, if they were just really to just seriously think about what that means, and even when we're thinking about whenever I start my workshops, I always do land acknowledgement. But part of it I add is the 7 grandfathers teaching, right? And the 7 grandfathers teaching, they talk about love, bravery. I'm sorry, I don't have all of them right now, but I say, I always started off with that because I say, wouldn't it be so amazing if we were to really take these values and pay attention to these values and see where everything that we need to do, professionalism comes into, being honest. It comes into loving what you're doing, because you're not going to be unprofessional if you don't love what you're doing, right? So it's things like that. Respect comes into this idea of being a problem solver. I love my community so much that I'm trying to solve my problem. I'm trying to solve problems, and by respecting my community, that's why I'm doing this. So for me, these are the ideas that come out of this ADD brain, because I just see things differently. Like I do. I mean, my family laughs at me because I'm called the idea generator. I'm like, if I could get paid for all my ideas, I'd be rich for sure by now. But you know how it goes.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective, though, because I think we're encouraged to see all these things as kind of like separated skills or mindsets or behaviors. But I think the way you just described it there makes it so clear how they're not really like, and I think, it's taken me a long time to maybe realize this as well, but these are, because I've always kind of approached it academically, right? Or as like a teacher, it's like, now we're going to learn how to communicate, and now we're going to learn how to think critically, right? But those two things are actually like, they're complementary skills, and like doing one without the other doesn't really make sense. And I think, you were talking about the importance of representation there too. And I think especially in a field that is highly represented by women of color in ECE, to not have representation when you're training people to become ECE teachers and go into a field where, they're also going to be dealing with students from diverse backgrounds, is unthinkable, right? But I think we've done it and continue to do it, right? And we even look at our own department, Mark, right? And I think, we're trying.
We've been doing work in that area for sure.
But there's a long way to go,
right?
And I think, I consider myself to be, hopefully a sympathetic and empathetic person, but ultimately, as a white man, I can't even begin to know the experiences of a lot of my students who come from different communities and different backgrounds, and so without that representation at some point in their kind of journey, right, what happens to them, right? And I guess kind of, I think it's important to recognize that this is a systemic issue, and it's up to institutions and organizations and systems to kind of, address it. But I guess also in the meantime, while that slow work happens very slowly, what would be your advice to students who don't see themselves represented?
I tell them to be the representation, what they're not seeing. Like this is, and as you were, sharing what you're sharing there, Mike, I was thinking about the idea that it's okay. I was thinking about the idea of why Wondrous came to be. Is because I'm thinking imagine if we were to share more information about the fact that, you could be a professor, you have to do this, or you could be an MPP, you could be the dean of a college or university. Just because you don't see it right now doesn't mean it can't happen. The goal in terms of helping our young people develop and nurture their talents, abilities, gifts, and skills is for them to recognize that, I can do this. Like it may not be exactly where I'm going in terms of, okay, well, I love talking, so maybe I could become a teacher. Maybe, you could become a teacher. But did everyone know that Trudeau was a teacher? Right? Like a lot of our MPs started off as educators before they became what they are now. So helping our young people see that a pathway going one way doesn't always mean it's only going to go that way is what will help our young people to really get into these spaces, to be the representation that they haven't seen.
I know that, often even in my teaching, and this probably connects to ECEs, is, modeling is a really important, modeling even for my children, my kids. I know sometimes that when I'm frustrated, not feeling well, anxious, stressed out, that, the way I behave, they're watching, and they're watching how I interact, how I treat people, and all those kinds of things. And I'm interested to hear your perspective on sort of how, and we're going to have a range of students. We're going to have students, students of color, Black students, Indigenous students listening to the podcast. But for some students who might be hesitant or apprehensive or feeling like where do I start? For me, I know that reflection was a big part of my starting place. Okay, I love reading, I love books, so I would consume a lot of literature from different parts of the world, but then I would reflect on my own privilege, my own experiences. I'm just wondering, as a starting place for a student who might feel a little apprehensive or a little bit worried about how do I begin my sort of EDI journey, would reflection be a good starting point? Would it be taking upon yourself to learn something? What little tips might you have for a student starting out in their journey?
I love that you brought that up, Mark, because it's so true. Reflection, awareness, and taking responsibility. These things are extremely hard to even discuss, right? Because many people will be like, oh yeah, I take responsibility all the time.
Right.
But do you, right? So sometimes it's, I take responsibility for what they feel they should take responsibility for. Sometimes taking responsibility means taking responsibility even when you know in your hearts that, like a group project, for instance, okay? We've all been there. Group projects, hot mess, conflict, okay? Nobody wants, we all know what happened. So many of us will be like, yeah, you know what? I'm aware of what I've done. But sometimes if you speak to the rest of the group members and we're speaking honestly, and they start to say, hey, you know what? Even though I know you feel like you were here, you weren't actually here. Because even though you were here with us, you were on your phone, or you were speaking to the rest of the students in the class, or you weren't really, XYZ. Or you weren't available. So when you weren't available when we needed you to be available. So are you taking full responsibility for everything in terms of saying, you know what, I should have stepped up, I could have stepped up? Or are you just taking enough responsibility to get you by to say to the teacher, yeah, I was there. I okay, maybe I wasn't there fully, but so I feel like you're right. Reflection is number one. And how do people reflect? People reflect, surprisingly. I know it takes, this is going to, people rub people the wrong way, but this is where when people start to talk to you about your behaviors, you have to listen. You have to.
But it's so hard.
It's so hard, right? And that's the thing, is that nobody wants feedback, right? A book that I use for my workshop is called Having Difficult Conversations. And one of the things they talk about is this idea of when you take the feedback, don't show any emotion. So, you know what, Michael, I'm sorry, but you know what? I didn't appreciate the fact that you were late. You were, you didn't contribute the way you were supposed to. And, for me, I felt like the group lost a lot because of what you did. So Michael's just supposed to sit there, not say anything.
I'm going to react.
Not react.
Yeah, exactly. No reaction, right? So no,
right.
And it's hard. It's
very hard.
Because you're supposed to be listening.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? So just the goal is to, instead of react, take it in. Take it in just for a minute. And then kind of go backtrack and say, okay, let me go through everything and let me think, was I really not doing the best I can? And we know it's hard. Many people, it's hard to do. So
I know we try to teach listening skills or at least address them in a lot of the courses we teach, because we teach communications. And it's one of the most challenging yet important things that we read in the research is it's really important to be a good listener, but it's so hard,
I have a little theory that I created / I don't know what you want to call it, but anyway, it's called Remember, Reflect, Change, and Maintain. So remember, reflect, change, and maintain. So I use this in the workshop to help people understand, whenever you're thinking about somebody else's feelings, remember obviously how you felt in a situation, right? Mm-hmm. So particularly I share this with parents is, as a parent, yes, you grew up possibly getting whooped, right? And you feel like it was okay and it turned you into the person that you are today. However, stop and think, remember, when you were really going through it, Did you feel great? Right? Did you feel great? So that's part, like you remembered the situation. Now you're reflecting on it. So now after you reflect on it, okay, what am I going to do? Do I have to change something? Am I changing my thoughts? Am I changing an action? What am I going to change? Am I going to change my relationship with my child in order for me to understand that just because I was raised this way doesn't mean I have to raise my child this way, right? Because being a conscious parent, it's new to all of us, right? Parents, when our parents were growing up, they didn't have to think about being a parent. Their job was just to be in the house and feed you, clothe you, give you, that was it. That was being a conscious parent at that time. Now being a conscious parent means when I have a conversation with my children, I'm not just saying, how was your day? I'm asking legit, like, how are you feeling? How's your, what is your mental health like? What are you okay with all of what's happening? You know, you're going to school, you're going to work, or I noticed at recess that you didn't eat your snack, or I noticed when you came home, you didn't eat your lunch. What happened? Right? So in order for us to truly help young people and anyone reflect, it really is helping them understand. I know as cliche as it sounds, is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, at least trying to, right?
I mean, we've talked a bit about EDI as kind of like a way of kind of being, right? And I think we often think of EDI as like this, and Mark, you were talking about this as well. Like it's kind of like an added on piece to a lot of stuff, curriculum, or you bring in a text, like, hey, I've done my diversity piece, right?
Or a company, a company. Yeah. The company does the retreat. Like, we've done our 2-day retreat. We're good. You know,
and everyone's diverse and equitable now. And
it's all solved.
And not to say that stuff shouldn't happen. But I guess, I think it's often kind of approached that way. Or EDI as like a separate kind of employability skill or mindset, separate from critical thinking or communication. So I think we mostly agree that it's important, but it's not really perceived as a skill, right? I think we see it as like a separate thing that's not the same as communication or numeracy or critical thinking or whatever it might be. I'm wondering how you've kind of integrated EDI principles into other core employability skills. And you've kind of talked about this already, but like the connection between these skills, as a way to demonstrate that EDI is not just separate, but is an essential part of kind of overall professional abilities and skills.
Yeah, it's like I had mentioned with the grandfather teaching, when we're thinking about helping people to see what makes sense. Like I like when you mentioned that, how do we embed it into everything? It's already embedded into everything. Like if you think about it, it's already right there. Another piece for me when I think about equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, the piece that I want to add now is the W, which is well-being. Because when you think about this, for me to be equitable, I have to consciously be aware of what needs to be done. So first of all, it's understanding what equity means, right? We always have, that famous picture of they're standing on the box, right? Yeah, and it's not about equity. It's not about equality. It's about equity. So, and I say that to the students, so the first thing I do with the students is every class always starts off with, how are you? I never start the class with beyond, how is everybody feeling? Like, how is your mental health? And then, and this is obviously after the land acknowledgement, but then I do a 5-minute or we do a connect before the content piece. And when I do that, I go around. So after I've said hello and how are you to the group, I now go around and legit, like each person, I go over, how are you? And I mean, of course, you got 50 students. It's not the easiest thing to do. Yeah. But I can tell you that I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be here if I didn't do that, because I don't think any of the students would have mentioned who I am had they not felt a sense of belonging in my class, right?
And community.
And community, right? That was the whole point of doing it, is just helping them understand that piece. So for me, when I think about the equity, diversity, belonging piece and how do we embed it into, think about digital fluency, if we're thinking about innovation, if we're thinking about all these pieces, it's as small as saying that if we're going to build something, okay, we're building something for an organization. Are we making sure that we're using things that are sustainable? Are we making sure that we're going back to what's equitable for those involved, right? I find that, like I said, I feel like it's easy for me to see, but I guess it's not easy for all of us to see and recognize, because if you're not living it daily and you don't see the need for it, then you're not going to see the need for it.
Right.
And because I always and because I'm working with children and I see the need for explaining to them what equity means. So when someone comes to me and says, one of the children will like, well, how come you gave such and such that and you didn't give it to me? Well, I gave it to them because that's what they need right now. So I remember working with a child and he always needed to walk, always had to get up. It was just, he was a very, I think he was very traumatized. There was a lot going on with him. And for me, I had to sit down and have a conversation with the class and say, I understand that right now you're seeing him go outside, but the reason why he needs to go outside is because that's the way he needs to learn. And if there's anything here that you need to help you learn, I will do the same for you. Just like when I say to you, I leave snack open. Like even small things like that for me with educators, I'm like, let a child eat. I'm like, when, we talk about this idea of changing the way the system is and the way education is, but yet we're still, no, lunchtime is over. It's over. Snack time is over. And it's like, do you eat when everyone else eats? Do you use the washroom when everyone else uses the washroom? So why do we expect these things from our young people?
Underrated or overrated using emojis in professional communication?
Overrated. I think we need to, but I'm guilty. I won't even lie. I do it all the time, but I mean, it's overrated. I think just need to
tone it down a bit.
Turn it down. Yeah. Turn it down.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
Overrated or underrated? Social media for professional networking.
Social media for
you could group.
I think
LinkedIn.
I feel like it's underrated, especially for me right now. Like I'm thinking about my situation and I'm like, girl, you need to get on it. Cause I mean, I know there's ways to use it. I just haven't been able to really leverage it the way I should. I think it could be underrated. Yeah.
Overrated or underrated, the role of mentorship in career development?
Oh, underrated. I think we need to, if there's anything that we need to invest in, it's the mentorship. Like, I feel like this is part of what I talk about, is that if we can get more people to show our youth what they're doing, then again, it will just open up so many opportunities for them to see what's out there, right? I always joke and say to my family, like, I have to make sure that when I go to the high schools and talk, I have to be driving a BMW. And they laugh. They're like, why? I'm like, because young kids, that's how they respond, right? They want their mentor to look a certain way. And I'm like, you know what? If I can just code switch a little bit just to appease and just to get my message across, just so they're able to say, okay, we get it, they'll eventually get to the point and they'll know that it's not about the car. It's not about the money. It's not about your house. It really is about what you love to do. But yeah, starting off, I think, that's one part of it. But yeah, mentoring we need it.
Overrated, underrated, learning from failure versus kind of learning from success.
Underrated.
So learning from failure is underrated.
Yes, underrated. Yeah. I think many of us are still in that situation where we don't want to fail, that we don't do anything. Right. So if we truly help our young people understand that, I think it'll help them with regards to, responding to failure better than they do. Right. Understanding that the more you do, even though it may seem and feel like you're failing at it, the more you do it, okay, maybe you failed a few times, but it's getting you to success. There's no other way. You can't get to success without failure. You cannot.
Overrated or underrated parent communication apps like Lilio, Class Dojo, Story Park?
Underrated. I think these apps, obviously, of course, it's because I'm going to, it's about early childhood education, number one, and it's about children and families, but Using them can definitely be beneficial. I think sometimes parents relying on them and educators relying on them is
Right.
where, we kind of run into a bit of a sticky situation, but
Right.
totally underrated. I think if we could use them more, I think it would help with regards to our families, seeing more of what's happening with their children, educators being able to, share information more, when we're thinking about keeping them in the loop of what's going on, because it's not always easy for educators to greet the parents at the door, right? I'm sure you all know when you're picking up your child, you don't have no time for no conversation with your teacher.
No.
You're just like, well,
Yeah.
everything's
Grab
good.
and
Yep,
go,
they're all
yeah.
in one piece.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. We're out.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's like you talked a lot about belonging, right? And I think if done properly, those tools can help create a sense of like belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're just aware of like what's happening and you feel
Connected. There we go. Connections.
Connections.
Good spot to end.
Nice. Yeah, I was about to say, perfect.